Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review The Task. So this movie is on Tubi, T-U-B-I. It's a free movie and TV service. You've probably heard of it by now, especially considering how it seems to actually have taken off. I went into Tubi and I saw this film called The Task. So this movie kind of lays out a reality show that eventually it seems that is very kind of reminiscent to me of watching stuff like the show Fear from MTV, or like I just started to watch this movie and I saw like there were certain cast members that were fairly familiar to me. Like I've seen the guy who ends up playing Dixon in this movie. I've seen him in like Final Destination. I've seen him, Cora Stanton, of course, who plays Jesus on The Walking Dead, and also Prodigal Son. I saw the girl who ends up playing Tony. I've seen her in Stanley's Lucky Man, and like I started to see a lot of familiar faces when I was to watch, really just the show or this movie. I mean, not a show; it's a movie. So, going into this, what is this really about? Teeing it up, of course. There isn't much actually to say overall about this film. I would say that this film is just an okay film. Uh, Really, it also is to be kind of interesting of to try and figure out whether or not that this is all really going on. It seems like they kind of keep you on edge whether things are really to be real or fake or whatever. They kind of keep toting that line. And so that's the thing that I kind of thought that this was interesting, was just because of the fact that we have these people in this reality show that are to seemingly have to put their lives in people's hands to otherwise justify getting $20,000. So, yeah, so with that said, so the main thing about this is we are to have supposedly these people spend an entire night in this prison. I'm like, okay, I've seen that hefty amounts of that being done in the MTV Fear show. So I'm just like, okay, this is not any hugely different than anything that I've seen. But so eventually going further on into this, we have these people who have to stay into this one specific room, and then eventually they send people off to do certain kind of tasks that of course have something to do with their fear, coincidentally. The only thing that I thought was dumb was they end up having them pull out chess pieces. They end up having to forcibly have people pull out chess pieces, but there's nothing random about what they're doing because every single person is to have to face their greatest fear. So I don't get why they have to have chess piece names when obviously they can just use their actual names and say, well, of course you are going to this objective because you're going to have to face your greatest fear. So, like, the chess pieces did not make sense to me, but overall, I just kind of thought that this movie was okay and it was fun. Like, it was interesting to see these certain kind of actors in this scenario of which that I've kind of seen them in other things. But that's about as all as really what is to be said about this movie. So with that said, let's go into that double five time territory. Let's just go into spoilers about this one, because at the end of the day, I would say that this movie is just a thing to watch. So let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time we need to spoil this movie. So, the very beginning of the film, we end up seeing these people kind of doing common day-to-day stuff. And then all of a sudden, they end up getting, having a pig head upon their face and shoved into this van. So, these people, of course, get out of this van with their pig head costume, and all of a sudden we have these camera guys with masks. I'm like, okay, so this is to tell us that this is to tune into a reality show. So, all of a sudden we have our host eventually take off his said mask and reveal, like, oh, hey, you guys are on this reality show. and it seems that not everyone's face is to also be on here, which that is just great. Of course. Um, so, anyways, Taylor is to be this host. It's like, oh, hey, Taylor. Like, I've seen him on, like, Superman and Lois. Like, that's kind of interesting. That, like, eventually I'm seeing him here when I've seen him in being Morgan Edge on Superman and Lois. Anyways, pushing on. So, eventually we have one person out of this whole group who is to otherwise decide that he wasn't going to be a part of this mission, so he ends up going off into this taxi. But we end up finding out that the one person that quit was just one of their guys that they just planted there. And supposedly this guy who left was the guy that like knew all about this place and how it was really scary to him to be involved in this kind of environment. So all these people were to be handcuffed going into this prison. The people that all said, "Sure, we'll go and we'll do this." It seems that we had certain characters that had absolutely no like fear whatsoever about this. That if anything, like there were some people that did have that like scared mentality, but then there's other characters that obviously uh, were to kind of complain that this is like the easiest money that they could have ever made. So push on. So eventually they all go into meet into this room, and so not only do they get a note like telling them about like, hey, you're on the show, great, whoopie doo doo booty, but then eventually they end up getting this TV screen that is to come up consistently with this clown that is to tell people what to do. So the very first task is to go out and have Randall go into this church room and to speak this thing from out of the Bible. And of course, Randall's greatest fear is to say anything religious or to just do anything kind of religious. And so, and every single time there's to be a person that comes in to say like what their greatest fear is, and then they work on that fear. So, Randall's greatest fear is something to do with religion. Here's some kind of cheap things that they ended up doing that I know kind of Fear probably did that too. The MTV show Fear probably did this, where like all the kids were coming in a group into this prison, and they were all handcuffed together, and they wanted to make these people like go much faster to get where they're going. So all of a sudden they made dog sounds to make these people think, oh, there's dogs coming, we should run, and the dogs aren't even there. So they just wanted to make those people move quicker throughout this place to eventually get to where they need to go because, hey man, freaking hurry it up. Like, we have a show to do. So, speaking of show, so eventually everyone gets uncuffed, and eventually Randall is to go off to his task after everyone picks a chess piece out of this box. So Randall goes off and is to speak this thing out of the Bible, and so all of a sudden there's to be all these other people saying these all words, and I'm like, man, I'm like, why did they have to do that effect? Like, that just seems like they're trying to spook people. But anyways, so Randall, after going and having his flashlight turn off suspiciously, eventually this light is to come on, and so then after Randall is to read this thing from the Bible, he then has to turn off the candle, or turn off the candle? Yeah, turn off the candle. Blow the candle out, let's say, and then he ends up having to sit in this church for 60 seconds. Like, wow, what a sweat off the brow, right? So he sits there, and of course he accomplishes that, and then he goes back to where the group is. So the next person to get his task is to be Dixon. So Dixon is to go out and eventually have things of blood dribble on him, which is he obviously finds out is fake blood. And so he ends up going into this room where he has to get this thing of clothes on, which he ends up finding out that right by those clothes is a thing of bugs. And the cameramen are just high-fiving themselves and just so proud about all the work that they've done to add all these props and all these things into the show. When Randall was making his way to this church, we had these like baby doll pieces, which I'm like, okay, like this kind of just feels cheap, but whatever. Hey man, whatever, however you can do this, however you can do the movie. So, eventually Dixon makes his way to this place where he's going to have to go and sit and lock himself into this little place that looks like he's buried alive. Or it seems like this place is so cramped that it feels like he's eventually going to get buried alive. So they have him sit and stew in there, and the guy's like, dude, it looks like crap is in here. And so he sits in there, he goes, and he's buried alive, supposedly. So, because that's his greatest fear. So they basically just forget about him, and then they go off, and they just kind of focus on a number of other people. So all of a sudden, there's a number of other people that all end up going out to do certain tasks. And we end up having Angel, who is the kind of girl who wants to desperately go out there and do some task. It seemed like they save her for last because she's the one that I guess is the least scared. So it's like, oh, we're not gonna have her go last. We're just gonna figure out how to do everyone else before her because so that way we can get some good scared footage. So we have Tony and Stanton who end up going to their task, which is to go to this gas chamber. And here's also the funny thing. So it seems that Connie and Big Man and Snow, they're the people in the production room watching this thing all play out. It's kind of like the one Halloween movie where eventually like Busta Rhymes was putting together that whole show, and eventually they realized that, oh, Michael Myers is in there. Oh no. So like it eventually the show became real. Kind of like that. So eventually they're putting this show together, and all of a sudden we end up eventually finding that there is to be some extra that they didn't plan for. That supposedly this guy is to look like the warden. And so they start to get concerned. They're like, okay, somebody's messing up with the cameras and stuff like that. We ended up having a cameraman go out to adjust some of the cameras because there were some problems with the cameras. We ended up finding out that that cameraman ended up getting dead. And like this guy was like smoking a thing of weed. He ends up seeing the warden. He's like, hey, like, how's it going? And then he ends up getting killed, like stabbed in the eye or something. So I've covered all the camera stuff so that way I can make sure that we got most of this movie done. There's so many side pieces to this movie, but whatever. So eventually, like, they all figure out that it seems that the people who had sent these guys out are probably messing with these people. And so the production team figure that out, that it's somebody higher up that is messing with them. And so Connie eventually calls like her executive or whatever, her higher up boss, and is like, hey, like, did you guys plan something extra for this show? And they're like, no, we don't know what the heck is going on. So all of a sudden, so what ends up happening is, let's cover the Tony and Stanton stuff. So it seems like there is more and more disturbing knowledge of the prison that they couldn't even say on the show because they would get sued by the town, supposedly. So Tony is to go off into this gas chamber and to be put into this electric chair kind of chair, and then be given this gas mask over her head, because Stanton is like, okay, so there's supposedly going to eventually be smoke coming in here. And so, like, Stanton just precautionary measures gives Tony this gas chamber mask just in case, like, something happens without, like, because supposedly Stanton is to leave the room, and we find that there's to be this dinner table set up right next to this gas chamber, I guess because the warden had assumed that he would want a dinner and a show. So I guess that's the disturbing thing, where it's like, hey, I'm going to go and eat and enjoy my meal while someone's to die right in front of me in the gas chamber. Which is kind of weird, but meh, whatever. So Stanton is to go off and has to supposedly pull all these levers or something like that to eventually release the smoke to save Tony. And so Stanton runs off to eventually try and get all these levers to save Tony from her gassy death, supposedly. So now we have to have both Randall and Shu, which is the blonde-haired girl, Shu, go off onto their mission. And so they end up going off onto their mission to be completely stopped by this warden who has this knife in hand. And so Randall and Shu go and end up getting stabbed by this warden and getting killed. That's why all of a sudden now Connie is thinking, oh my god, this isn't real. There's something going on here. We didn't plan for this. Oh my god. Like, so eventually Connie is like saying like, okay, we gotta pull everything. Like, there's something going on here we didn't factor for. So all of a sudden, like, Connie's telling Angel, like, Angel, like, we're gonna pull you guys out. There's some kind of X factor here that we didn't plan for. So yeah, we're gonna pull you guys out. And so Angel's like, no, like, you're not, like, I'm going to get my money. I'm going to participate in the show, open the door, let me do my thing, and let's get the F out of here. So the guy who Snow ends up pushing a button to unlock the door for her. She goes and she is to do her task. And her task is to supposedly shiv the warden and take the key from him and eventually unlock her cell, so that way she can go and then unlock her other, like the guy who is still sifting in and being almost buried alive, like she's to go and unlock him and unlock another person. So Angel is to go on and make it to Stanton. Stanton evidently is weirdly hanging upside down, and he's hanging upside down, and all of a sudden there's to be like the warden there and a bunch of his women, because there is to be this history or this story of the warden who had continued to sleep with all these women, and then like they all like had babies, and he bizarrely refed the babies back to the women. So gross. Both Shu and Randall, before they were to go off to their side mission and get stabbed, both Shu and Randall were to have gone and found this meal that was to be reserved for them. And so they had to go and cook this meat and eat it. And supposedly Shu's greatest fear is anything that's not vegetarian. I'm like, Wow, that's got to be a real burden of a task. Wow, that's a real fear there. So all of a sudden, like, now Randall and Shu are forced to eat this piece of meat, which they don't know what it is. And so Shu ends up eating it, but then she barfs it up. But task is still complete, and then they go on to go and get stabbed when they end up trying to, I think, return from where they were. So, uh, so eventually Angel is to make it to Stanton, and by the time she makes it there, we had the warden who had slit the throat of Stanton and he had bled out. And so it seemed that everybody just started to rip and tear apart Stanton. And so Angel was to run off because she was to realize that her brother was dead. And so she ends up running off and just trying to get the heck out of there. Eventually, she ends up finding the cameraman, and then she eventually just starts running off further. So eventually what ends up happening is Connie decides, well, I'm going to go out here and I'm just going to go and try and save everyone and do the right thing. So Connie starts to go out there because we already have uh, like Taylor, who's the host of the show, and Big Daddy going out there to try and see what's going on. And eventually, for whatever reason, their cameras went dead. So Connie goes out there to try to find people, to try to save people, and then eventually Connie bumps into Angel, and Angel starts to run off. And so, like, Connie is now faced with the warden, and she's like, "Oh my God, what do I do? What do I do? What am I gonna do here?" And so all of a sudden, we end up having the warden that is to just clap, like golfers clap. And so all of a sudden, we end up finding out that all of this was fake all along. That all of a sudden we have both Shu and we have Randall that are to show to Connie that the blood that came from them was all fake. That the host, Taylor, was fine. That Big Daddy came out and was like, ha 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 ha, we pulled one over on you. Ha ha ha, isn't that great? So Connie is to eventually get a call from her boss to say, like, yeah, like we had to pull a lot of strings to pull all of this off. Like, isn't it great? And so, really, the one who won all this was just Connie herself. Because eventually they had cameras even in the production van because they were supposedly trying to do something extra here. So, like, even the production team was not knowing whether or not everything was real or fake or whatever. So, now, like, there's this supposed big reveal that, like, hey, like, we pulled a prank on you. So, like, that's the funny part of the show. But then shortly after this, we still have Angel running off like it's fake, like it isn't fake, like it's all real. And so eventually we have Connie who goes and finds Tony to just be like, ha ha ha, like, hey, like, good acting, like, you got me. And all of a sudden, Connie's door is to close into that gas chamber room, and we see the warden sitting next to that table eating an apple. And so all of a sudden, we end up finding out that this, after all, there was something that was actually real here. Tony actually died, sadly. And I'm like, yeah, she's technically dead, but you could see her chest breathing situation. Like, they should have come up with a camera angle where it doesn't show Tony breathing, even though she's dead. That's where I was kind of confused. I'm like, well, you can see her chest moving because camera angles suck because they should have figured out a way to make it look like she's not breathing. But oh well, it's a movie. So all of a sudden, Taylor is to go back to Dixon and try to unlock him uh, from his buried alive freaking door thing. And we end up finding out that Dixon does not have eyes anymore. Evidently, someone plucked out his eyes to really just show that, oh, okay, I guess this is real after all. So all of a sudden, there's this weird wind or storm or something coming through this prison that is all of a sudden to, I guess, kill everyone off for some goofy reason. To really just showcase that there is something here that is real and legitimate and whatever, and it is going to just all of a sudden just kill every single one of these people. Because supposedly there was a report before about 20 homeless people all trying to shack up in this prison, and they all died supposedly. And so what we end up seeing at the very tail end of this movie is all of a sudden we have Angel rushing out of this prison. And so we have the cameraman who's like, hey, yeah, like, tell us your reactions. Like sell it to the camera of what's going on here. And so Angel's like, I'm sorry, but get that freaking camera out of my goddamn face. And she smashes the camera. And that's the one last thing that you see, is that all of this doesn't seem like a show because people ended up actually dead, supposedly. So yeah, like, there was this back and forth of whether or not that this movie or this thing was legit or not, and then eventually we end up finding out that it seemed to have been a prank, but then there's the turn of like, oh no, this is real. And that I was like, okay, like, all right, like, I would have liked it to have been like the joke all along, or I don't know, like, I like movies like Cry Wolf, and so I was kind of happy with there kind of being this kind of fake ending or whichever. So I was just kind of okay with this movie. I was just like, meh, like, all right. Like, so with that said, I think I'm going to get out of here. Hopefully I covered most of this movie. I kind of didn't go into much of the fears or whatever of everyone. Like, I know that Angel's fear was nothing, and I also know that like, there wasn't, anyway, pushing on. I don't remember what both either Stanton or Tony's fear was, but I know that they ended up having a clip of them saying something. But anyways, with that said, I'm going to get out of here. More than likely, probably what I'm going to have to do, because I know I'm going to put out 3 videos today, but I've only put out 2. I'm getting a little behind on my uploads, but I'm going to try to put something out. So I'll at least say that. But probably the 3rd video will probably have to forcibly be like just me covering The Masked Singer, because I know that's coming out. So probably as soon as I can watch that show, I'm going to try to do a review of that, I guess. So timing out exactly when this when this stuff comes out, but I'm getting a little behind the 8 ball. So I think probably tonight I'm going to have to just start going and doing some extra videos to prep for the next day. So that's what I'll do. So goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.